right, we talked about the beginning of World War II. We talked about the events that brought America into it. So let's talk about what we did when we went across the Atlantic and actually joined the fight in Europe. Okay? Allied strategy. With a draft in volunteers, the American military was ready to fight with the Allies, but where? The U.S. had to fight in the Atlantic and the Pacific. All right, the Atlantic and the Pacific. Why is that? Because on the Atlantic side, we were dealing with Germany and Italy, and on the Pacific side, we were dealing with Japan. So again, we're spread across two fronts, and we had to figure out basically the best way to help the Allies and also protect our own resources. Stalin wanted continental Europe to be the first target. Now that makes sense because Stalin has just jumped ship after Hitler broke their non-aggression pact. But Churchill, who was leading Britain, thought that the inexperienced American troops would be easily defeated and stretched too thin. So he suggested that Americans head to German-occupied North Africa. Okay? Again, we had talked about how Germany had gone to, how Germany and Italy, when they were taking over, that they had gone so far as to go into Africa and take over Ethiopia. So in December of 1941, FDR agreed to Churchill's plan, leaving Stalin to handle Europe. Okay? So first things first, let's talk about North Africa. The fighting in North Africa stretched throughout several countries. In June 1942, the German Afrika Corps, led by the Desert Fox, General Erwin Rommel, pushed into Egypt. In the Battle of El Alamein, the British stopped the German advance, preventing them preventing them from capturing their intended target. Okay, so we already have these very specific, goodness gracious, words are hard, these very specific strategic moves being handled. And again, we're trying to balance the Allied response to all of the three Axis commanders who are working on, taking over as much land as they can and amassing as much power as they can. Okay? And what they were really going for in the top, if I can find it, yeah, here we go. Okay, so here's El Alamein. We're preventing them from getting the Suez Canal. Now, we had talked about the Panama Canal, and we had talked about the Suez Canal being the first really sort of success story as far as the canals go. Okay? And so the British forces did not want to give up this incredibly strategic point, the Suez Canal. Okay? Between the Mediterranean and the Red Seas. Down here, this little blue right here is the Red Sea. Okay? And then later that year, General Dwight D. Eisenhower set up headquarters in Gibraltar, which, as you can see, is over here. Put a line by that. Over in Spain. And in 1943... the Allies helped drive the Afrika Corps out of North Africa. So it wasn't even just as simple as, hey, we don't want you to take over. It was these other points of strategic interest. It's very much a game of chess at this point in the game because we have the Axis with the three different dictatorships working together, and then we have the Allies working to not only, again, stop their spread, but also push them back to where they had come from. And yeah, so this whole thing is a big kind of game of chess. It's very interesting to see how these things play out. Okay, so that was where they started, North Africa. Then Italy. The Allies re-entered Europe from the south. In July 1943, they landed on Sicily. Sicily is right here. This little island here at the tip of the Italy boot there. Led by General George S. Patton, they moved on to mainland Italy. By then, after losses in Africa and shortages in Italy, Italian leaders had overthrown Mussolini, and the new government surrendered to the Allies. Okay, so here we have one of our dictatorships down. They realized that totalitarianism was not all it was cracked up to be. They overthrow Mussolini and they decide to back out of the war. They surrender to the Allies. Hitler, though, did not accept defeat. He sent even more Axis troops. Even though Italy tried to surrender and be done and be out of it, he was not going to let them go. In January 1944, the Allies surprised German troops at Anzio. Let me see if I can underline that here. A city on the western coast of Italy, and after several months defeated them. By June 1944, Rome was liberated. Here's Rome right here, and that's a big deal. Okay, that's the capital city. Okay, that's the seat of most of the power in Italy at this point. And if you think about it in the sense of today, like the Vatican City and all of that, that's right there. That's all there together. Okay, so that was a very, very big deal for them to be able to reclaim that as the Italians and push the Axis out once they had overthrown Mussolini. Meanwhile, in Russia, after their invasion of Russia in September 1942, German troops advanced to the industrial city of Stalingrad. But when winter came, words are so hard, you guys. The cold was so severe that much of the German army starved or froze to death. Still, Hitler refused to withdraw. So this is a second time here where things are clearly stacked against him, and yet he will not give up. Now, is that, determination and, perseverance, or is that just ill-advised stupidity, like bad choices? People started to see it as one of the two different ways. Either he was just a really dedicated leader, or he was this terrible, terrible tactician. So you're going to start to see this kind of come back to haunt him when he starts making these decisions and spending troops and resources in places where it appeared to be clear that he had already taken enough losses. In January of 1943, German commander General von Paulus defied the Führer's wishes and retreated. Okay? So the general was like, look, we cannot do anything else here. I've got to get these men out of here. Again, men are harder to replace than any sort of machinery or other equipment. But Hitler did not appear to care. The Soviets suffered massive losses, but their victory was a turning point in the war because it showed Hitler's totalitarianism was weakening. Again, people are starting to question this. Is he really the leader that we wanted, that we thought he would be? Is he really the guy with the good ideas? The Germans tried to seize Leningrad, a modern-day St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is what it's called today. But the Russians pushed them west. Okay? The Russians are, at this point, they are tired of dealing with all of this stuff. So they were like, absolutely not. Get out of our country. Just as harsh weather conditions in Russia stymied the German army, weather was a factor in the defeat of Napoleon's army in 1812. Russia has been a challenging country to conquer because of its natural safeguards, because of the really harsh climate, harsh winters and stuff like that. So that is one thing that Russia has going for it, is it has a built-in sort of protection in its weather, in its climate. All right, let's talk D-Day. After freeing Italy, the Allied forces were finally ready to enter German-occupied France. Okay, so they managed to take back Italy. Russia's already on our side, and they're working the Allied side, and they're working to push Germany out. So the big deal now is France that they took over at the beginning. Okay. June 1944, General Eisenhower, who was then the supreme Allied commander in Europe, started Operation Overlord. Operation Overlord. Hitler expected any invasion to be near the town of Calais. Okay, so Calais is up here on the French border, and again, London being the capital right here, he's expecting them to come this way, directly across the English Channel. But instead, when they started putting this together, they wanted, again, to use the element of surprise. They did not want to do exactly what seemed like the most obvious or even the most logical plan. Okay, so they had this Operation Overlord plan that ended up in the conflict we refer to as D-Day. So what did they do instead of the obvious plan? Here, early on June 6th, 1944, came to be known as D-Day. Okay, Allied forces landed, but not at Calais. Calais, again, I've got another map, so Calais is way up here. Paratroopers who arrived by parachutes. Okay, so that literally, this para right here, is referring to them using parachutes. Okay, so they're dropping out of planes. They arrived by parachutes, and amphibious troops trained to operate on both land and sea arrived in Normandy in France. Okay, and so Normandy here is this bright yellow area. It was highlighted on the map on the previous page as well in bright yellow. There were thousands of casualties. There, ironically enough, there is also a D-Day movie that was released recently. I don't know if you guys remember all of the movies that I sort of referenced in my last video, but again, I am not recommending anything to you. You must get approval from your parental units and or guardian angels. Don't get me in trouble. Okay, so thousands of casualties, but the invasion was successful. They were able to actually land and make a dent, make a real impression and make a good showing, set themselves up for a successful invasion and retake France away from Germany. American General Omar Bradley led the troops inland. On August 25th, okay, so this is June, July, end of August now, that all this is happening. Paris was liberated. Other Western European nations soon followed. Okay, so this was really a huge turning point, being able to free France from this German occupation. The Battle of the Bulge. Okay, Hitler made a final attempt to turn the tide. He again realizes that he's not in a good position, but he's not going to give up. He's not going to let it stop him, even though maybe he should have. All right, December 16th, 1944, he attacked the Belgian region of Ardennes. The attack forced Allied lines to move back in one spot, turning their line into a bubble shape or a bulge. If you watch this right here, this dotted line here sort of shows where we were pushed back. And so we have the bulge here. Okay? Where they pushed us back. And so this is how it got its name, is because the line made this sort of crazy shape. And so it sort of took on this name. All right, so by January, though, again, December 16th, he made his final attempt, his final big move. He attacked part of Belgium, and so he was able to make us sort of move our line. He was able to create the bulge, but even still, a month or less later, it still did not matter. The Allies were able to overcome, and we were able to push him back. even further. Okay? So, let's talk about this that was going on within Germany and German-occupied areas during all of this time. Okay? Remember earlier that Hitler, as part of his plan, as part of his campaign, he said, look, I know how to fix the problem because I know who caused the problem. It was the Jewish folk. Well, this led to an event called the Holocaust. Hopefully you all have heard about this. Hitler rose to power by convincing his people that Jews, did not mean to wiggle the picture, that Jews were to blame for Germany's hardships. In September 1935, Germany passed the Nuremberg Laws, stripping Jews of citizenship. On November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, Jewish businesses, synagogues, and other property were destroyed in riots. So the Night of Broken Glass here refers to shop windows and other things, public buildings, as well as other property. They had windows broken out, and just general acts of vandalism. And so it was the Night of Broken Glass because there was so much around at that point. They just went through and tore everything up. The Holocaust, literally here meaning destruction, had begun at this point. The Jews were being persecuted, specifically because of their heritage and or their religion. So if they were Jewish by heritage or if they were practicing Judaism, then they were a target. They were a target for this. Jews were moved into ghettos, and here the literal definition of this is a section of the city that is occupied by only one group of people, usually because they cannot live elsewhere as a result of economic hardships. If you'll remember us talking about shanty towns and the homelessness problem and stuff like that, this is a similar sort of thing. Okay, they were chased from their homes, they were run out of towns, and they were forced to live in these crummy conditions strictly because, again, of their heritage or the religion they chose to follow. So they were forced to live in these ghettos and forced to wear identifying yellow labels in the shape of the Star of David. If you're not familiar with that, that is what this is here at the top of the page. This is the Star of David. This it's a six-pointed star, and this became a symbol identifying people as Jewish, and they were instructed to wear it all the time. If they were not in the safety of their home at any point in public, the tensions were so high. Here, anti-Semitism is anti-Jewish feeling. Okay, so just being anti-Jew. Anti-Jewish people in general, they were required to identify every time that they were outside of their house. They were required to identify themselves by wearing these yellow six-pointed stars so that they could be identified on site. I can't even imagine the terrible persecution going on. This whole situation just goes from bad to worse. In January 1942, Hitler and the Nazis came up with a plan they called the Final Solution. The Final Solution. They planned to kill every Jew in a genocide in concentration camps. The young and healthy were forced to work in camps until they died. Others were killed immediately in gas chambers. 6 million Jewish people were killed, along with about 5 million others who did not fit in with Hitler's idea of a perfect Aryan society. And so anything like this, people with disabilities, anybody who opposed, anybody who disagreed, okay, if you did not fit that perfect Aryan mold, then you were just done away with. Okay, and here let's talk about genocide: a killing of a race, ethnicity, or religious group of people. So it's like killing entire generations is kind of how how this word comes from, because geno here is the same thing that we use for generations, and then side, meaning killing. So it's the idea is killing entire generations, killing entire ethnic groups, killing entire race, stuff like that. Okay, when we're talking about genocide, so not even just a massacre or a really bad thing that happens in one place. It's amassing people, all of one race, all of one ethnicity, all of one religious group, or all of the above, and getting them in one place and massacring them, and it becomes a genocide then. Okay, now here, right here at the end. Although Allied leaders heard rumors of these horrors, they did not make the rumors public. When they freed camp prisoners later, Allied soldiers were shocked to see the hugeness of Nazi brutality. Okay, so they didn't want to act on rumor, and they weren't exactly sure what the truth of this was. But once American troops got over into Germany, over into these camps, and were able to actually see, whomever was still around, that could be rescued, they were just totally shocked to find out not only were the rumors true, but it was even worse than what they had originally thought or been told or assumed. Oh, this is not what I need. All right, let's see. There should be one more page. Oh, whoops. I messed up. 398. Ha. Here we go. Okay, so President Truman. In the election of 1944, Roosevelt became the only person to be elected president for the 4th time in a row. Okay? Huge, no term limits, nothing at this point. But his health was fading. We had talked already about that when he came in, he was paralyzed from the waist down, and he didn't want to appear weak, but it was too much. Okay? So, April 12th, 1945, FDR died, and Vice President Harry S. Truman took charge. Now, this is just a little interesting tidbit. The S was not short for a middle name. It was just an S. His two grandfathers had both had S middle names, but they just gave him S as an initial instead of picking an S, a middle name that that began with S. And also, Harry was his full first name. Sometimes Harry is short for Harold or something like that. No, his full legal name was just Harry. Okay, so here, victory in Europe. After other air raids on German cities, the Allied forces launched a major attack on Dresden in February 1945. As Soviet troops entered Berlin, Hitler went into hiding. Okay, because obviously he didn't want to be caught at the end of all of his atrocities that he had committed. Not only were his actions in the active battles of the war terrible enough, but all of the atrocities committed as he executed the Holocaust were going to make him tremendously unpopular, and there was no way he wanted to face the consequences of his actions. Okay, so February 1945, we finally get into Germany. We're finally coming towards the end of the war. April 30th, 1945, 2 days after Mussolini was killed by Italian partisans, Hitler committed suicide so he wouldn't have to face Germany's defeat. Okay? On May 7th, after the Soviet army captured Berlin, again, here we've got the May 7th, Berlin. That was actually the the capital city there, the center of all this, the Germans surrendered to the Allied forces. May 8th was declared VE Day in honor of the victory in Europe. VE Day. But World War II was not quite over yet. Even though it was over in Europe, it was not completely over yet. The Americans realized that they still had a whole other front to clean up. So that's where we're going to stop for today. I've got questions over here. Watch for them to drop 1 or 2 at a time. And make sure you answer them on Google Classroom. All right, I will see you later, and I hope you guys all have a great and wonderful day.